So, given a historical understanding of evangelicalism, why is it that I don't identify as an evangelical now? As we were discussing, there really is or could be a variety of different theological views that exist within evangelicalism. And there are. It's not necessarily fundamentalism, and there are many, let's say, more liberal Christians that even would identify themselves as evangelical. I think for me, there are kind of two approaches that really are just kind of wrapped up into each other, and that makes it kind of murky. So the first is the basis of those four tenets that we were talking about: conversion, biblicism, evangelism, and centrality of the work of Christ. But then there's also the issue of what evangelical just means to our people in our modern culture, specifically the church in our modern culture. I talked more in another video about how a lot of people in our modern culture wouldn't necessarily be able to define evangelicalism. It's more of a pathos wherein people kind of know it when they see it and this sort of thing. And so the problem is that at the end of the day, what this term does when you use it is it signals something to people in your community or in surrounding communities. And what that means is that it's used to identify certain markers. If you say, I'm an evangelical, that signals certain ideas to other people. And it's often used as a way of being able to recognize if you can trust somebody or if they're kind of a part of your clan, whether or not people realize that's what they're doing. And so overall, regardless of the nuance of your beliefs or your values, when you say something like this, people are going to assume certain things. And that's where we talked about what's generally assumed for somebody that assigns themselves this sort of label of evangelical. What's generally assumed is that you believe in certain things, such as a person has to convert, meaning they have to affirm certain Christian doctrinal beliefs in order to be saved. They have to believe in a certain sort of substitutionary atonement of Christ's work on the cross. They have to adhere to certain biblicist ideas, and they have to agree to this responsibility that we have of going out and evangelizing and making disciples of people. So for me, I would say I differ in one sense that I don't want to give the idea that I agree with certain ideas like this. I think there are a lot of ideas that are very related to fundamentalism that I would reject, and I don't necessarily want to give the wrong image and suggest that I believe certain things that I don't. There's sort of a game there that I'm not really willing to play, wherein, as long as I identify myself as evangelical, people in my community can know that they can trust me because I believe the same things that they believe. And so I just don't want to give that idea, first of all. But also, I think foundationally, I would disagree with some of the things of these tenets. First of all, the idea of conversion. I don't believe that it is necessary for a person to specifically affirm Christian doctrines in order for them to have salvation, whatever that means. And I also think that there are a variety of ways of understanding Jesus's work on the cross. Even though a lot of evangelicals would suggest that in order to be a Christian, you have to understand it in a particular way theologically, I don't think that that's necessary. Interestingly, as a side note, the Bible doesn't really define what exactly is happening with Jesus dying on the cross. And so that's why throughout Christian history, there are a variety of ideas of what that meant and how that worked. I also don't think that evangelism specifically is the most helpful way of going about our work as followers of Jesus or followers of the way as it's described in the Bible. I think that the way that this has emerged and the way that we practice this in our modern culture can be a lot more harmful in most cases than helpful. But then, probably the primary reason that I wouldn't identify as an evangelical is because of the way that evangelicalism kind of defines the nature of the Bible. And this is where this term biblicism comes in. And biblicism, it's defined more precisely, and so there are a variety of ideas that experts have identified that makes it what it is for evangelicals. And so, to just kind of summarize this briefly, biblicism is essentially the idea that the Bible is generally literal, it is the primary and ultimate standard of truth for the world, it is the ultimate authority for our lives. It's, in some sense, given to us by God, and it's basically a document that contains claims or commands that are normative. That is, they're meant for all people over all time. And I've talked elsewhere about how and why I think that these things, they're not valid or helpful ways of thinking about the Bible or the nature of it. So, even though evangelicalism technically could contain a variety of nuanced variations of theological ideas, it essentially gives a sense of very specific Christian Orthodox doctrine that is largely fundamentalist and I would just largely disagree with. And so rather than somewhat being disingenuous by indicating that I believe certain things that I don't believe, I think it's probably a much better idea for me to just say, I don't believe those things, and I have a different idea of a variety of the foundational theological concepts that Christians would imagine or suggest are important for Christian faith and life. And while there are probably a lot of Christians who identify as evangelical that might be thinking, you're just, you're doing a lot of unnecessary work, there's no reason for you to reject the label, I would say it does go deeper than simply a labeling issue. And so that's where, we'll have to start getting into more conversations about specific theological ideas.